I'm Charlotte, 38 female. For the last 12 years, I've lived in a quiet suburban cul-de-sac with my wife, Eliner. I'm a data analyst, which means my world revolves around numbers, patterns, and the logical conclusions they lead to, while Eliner works as a fundraiser for a well-known charity, a job that thrives on her charm and charisma. Our life was built on what I thought was a solid foundation of trust, shared dreams, and a meticulously planned future. But one piece of mail was all it took to reveal that the foundation of our home, and our marriage, was nothing but a sinkhole of deceit. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Our home was a 2-story colonial with blue shutters, a place we'd bought together a decade ago. It was more than just wood and plaster. It was the physical manifestation of our partnership. Every decision, from the color of the paint in the kitchen to the type of roses planted by the front walk, was made together. I handled the structured, behind-the-scenes parts of our life, the budget spreadsheets, the investment tracking, the retirement planning. My job trained me to find comfort in order and predictability. I could forecast market trends with reasonable accuracy, so managing our household finances felt like a simple, comforting equation. Eliner, on the other hand, was the heart of our home. She was the one who remembered birthdays, organized neighborhood potlucks, and filled the rooms with laughter. She was vibrant and social, a perfect counterbalance to my more introverted, analytical nature. We were, in every sense, a team. Our financial arrangement was straightforward. We had a joint account for all household bills, including the mortgage. We both contributed a set percentage of our salaries to it each month, and I had set up automatic payments for everything to ensure we were never late. Eliner had agreed early on that she preferred me to manage the finances. "You're the numbers genius, Char," she'd say with an easy smile. "I trust you completely." And I trusted her. That trust was the bedrock of everything we had. It never occurred to me to question it, to double-check the transactions, or to verify that the systems I'd put in place were running as they should. Why would I? We were building a life together. Looking back, the signs were there, subtle as hairline fractures in a wall. They were small enough to be dismissed, explained away by the busyness of life. There were conversations that ended abruptly when I entered a room, moments where Eliner would angle her phone away from me with a quick flick of her wrist. She started talking more about the pressures at work, demanding donors, stressful fundraising galas, the constant need to meet higher targets. She seemed more tired, more distant. When I'd ask if everything was okay, she'd wave it off. "Just work stress," she'd sigh, leaning her head on my shoulder. "It's nothing you need to worry about." I accepted her explanations because I wanted to. I loved her, and I believed in the life we had built. The idea that she could be capable of a deception so profound was simply outside my realm of possibility. It didn't compute. Our friends saw us as the perfect couple. We were stable, happy, and complementary. Grace, my best friend of 20 years, often joked that our marriage was aggressively functional. Grace was a forensic accountant, someone whose entire career was based on finding the truth hidden in spreadsheets and financial records. She was sharp, pragmatic, and the one person I could talk to about anything. We'd have dinner once a month, and I'd talk about my boring data sets and she'd talk about her exciting fraud cases. During one of those dinners, just a few months before everything imploded, I mentioned that Eliner seemed a bit off. Grace listened intently, her brow furrowed. "Have you talked to her about it? Really talked?" she asked. I admitted I hadn't pushed too hard. "Maybe you should," she suggested gently. "Sometimes people carry things they don't know how to put down." I promised I would, but the moment never seemed right. Life kept moving, and the small cracks were plastered over with the daily routine of work, chores, and shared meals. The foundation felt solid enough, and I was too busy living on the first floor to notice the rot spreading in the basement. That was my mistake. I looked at the surface, the beautiful house, the happy marriage, the successful careers, and I assumed the underlying structure was just as sound. I saw the data points of our life and drew the conclusion I wanted to be true. But data, as I would soon learn in the most brutal way possible, can be manipulated. And the person I trusted to protect our foundation was the one systematically dismantling it, one brick at a time. The day it all began was a Tuesday, unremarkable in every way. The sky was a flat, boring gray, and a light drizzle was falling, the kind of weather that makes you want to stay inside with a cup of tea. I had worked from home, spending hours cleaning a massive dataset for a new project. My mind was numb with numbers and code. Around 3 p.m., I took a break to get the mail. I sorted through the usual collection of junk mail, catalogs, and a few bills. Then I saw it. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope, much heavier than the others. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize, and it was addressed to both me and a liener. But what made a cold dread snake its way up my spine was the bold, red text stamped across the front: "Official notice. Action required." My first thought was that it was a mistake, some kind of administrative error. I took it inside and placed it on the kitchen island, staring at it as if it were a venomous snake. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Legal notices weren't part of our well-ordered life. We paid our bills on time. We had excellent credit. We did everything right. I waited for a liener to get home. I didn't want to open it alone. The very presence of the envelope felt like an accusation, and I needed my partner, my teammate, to face it with me. When she walked in an hour later, shaking the rain from her coat, I was still sitting at the island, my tea long since gone cold. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, her smile faltering as she saw my expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I pointed to the envelope. "This came," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what it is." She picked it up, her movements casual, almost dismissive. She glanced at the front and her face barely flickered. "Probably just some legal spam," she said, tossing it back onto the counter. "They send those scary-looking things to get you to open them." She started talking about her day, about a difficult donor and a successful meeting, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept darting back to the envelope. Her lack of concern was unsettling. It was so out of character. Eliner was usually the one who worried, who would have insisted on opening it immediately. "Aren't you going to open it?" I asked, cutting her off mid-sentence. She sighed, a small, impatient sound. "Fine, if it'll make you feel better." She ripped it open with a careless tear. She pulled out a thick stack of papers, her back mostly to me. I watched her shoulders, looking for any sign of tension. For a few seconds, she was perfectly still. It was a silence, so heavy it felt like it was sucking the air out of the room. "Oh," I prodded, my voice tight. "What is it?" She turned around slowly, her face a carefully constructed mask of confusion. It's a foreclosure notice," she said, her voice sounding strangely rehearsed. "They're saying we haven't paid the mortgage in 4 months. It must be a bank error, a big one." A foreclosure notice. The words didn't make sense. It was like hearing a sentence in a language I didn't speak. A bank error. Yes, that had to be it. I clung to that explanation like a life raft. "An error," I repeated, standing up. "How could they make an error like that for 4 straight months?" "I don't know, Char," she said, her voice rising with frustration. "These big banks are a mess. I'll call them first thing in the morning and sort it out. Don't worry." She tried to put her arm around me, but I flinched. The cold dread I'd felt earlier was now a raging fire of anxiety in my gut. I took the papers from her hand. The words were stark and unforgiving. "Notice of default and intent to foreclose." Our names, our address. The outstanding amount was terrifyingly large, a combination of missed payments, late fees, and penalties. It was real. This wasn't a mistake. That night, I couldn't sleep. Eliner seemed to drift off almost instantly, her breathing even beside me. But I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the legal jargon from the letter swirling in my head. I'm a data analyst. I solve problems by examining evidence. The evidence in my hand said our home was being taken away. Eliner's explanation, a massive 4-month-long bank error that coincidentally started when she began acting distant, was a hypothesis, but it didn't feel right. The numbers didn't add up. The calm, dismissive way she had handled the letter felt wrong. Every instinct in my body was screaming that I was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. The foundation of my life had a crack I could no longer ignore, and I had a sickening feeling that if I looked closer, I wouldn't find a simple bank error. I would find a betrayal. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my investigation had to start not with the bank, but with the woman sleeping peacefully next to me. The next morning, Alina left for work with a breezy confidence that seemed entirely disconnected from our reality. "I'll make that call to the bank on my lunch break," she promised, kissing my cheek. "It'll all be sorted out by this afternoon. Try not to stress." The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, I was in my home office, my hands shaking as I logged into our joint bank account. I had set up the automatic mortgage payments myself years ago. They should have been there, a predictable, rhythmic debit every first of the month. I scrolled back through the transaction history. 4 months ago, the payment stopped. Not just the mortgage payment, but the payment itself. The automatic transfer I had created from our joint account to the mortgage lender was gone. It hadn't been declined for insufficient funds, it had been canceled. My blood ran cold. An automatic payment doesn't just cancel itself. Someone has to go into the system and manually delete it. There were only 2 people with access to this account, me and Alina. And it wasn't me. My mind reeled. Why would she do this? It made no sense. Sabotaging our own home? It was financial self-destruction. There had to be more to it. I started digging deeper. My job involves sifting through mountains of data to find anomalies, the single data point that doesn't fit the pattern. Our finances had always been a clean, predictable pattern. I needed to find the anomaly here. I looked at the contributions to the joint account. My paycheck deposit was there every 2 weeks, like clockwork. Hers was too, the same amount on the same schedule. But then I looked at the withdrawals. Aside from the usual groceries, utilities, and gas, there were other transfers, large ones. A recurring transfer for several $1,000s sent on the 3rd of every month for the last 6 months. It was sent to an external account. The memo line was blank. The receiving account was not one of our shared savings or investment accounts. The recipient name was listed simply as E. Vance. Vance. The name hit me like a physical blow. It was Alina's maiden name. We had been married for 12 years. She hadn't used that name since our wedding day. Why would she have a bank account under her maiden name? And why was she secretly transferring thousands of dollars from our joint account into it every month? The amount was significant, almost exactly the amount that should have been going toward the mortgage and our monthly savings contributions combined. It was a deliberate, systematic redirection of funds. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. This was a plan. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of my desk. The woman I had built my life with, the person I trusted with my heart and my future, was siphoning money from our shared life into a secret account. She was letting our home slip into foreclosure while hoarding cash on the side. The betrayal was so immense, so cold-blooded, that I couldn't wrap my head around it. I needed proof, something more concrete than just a line on a bank statement. Her personal files, her office, it felt like a horrific violation of privacy, but the foreclosure notice had already shattered that world. Our life was no longer a private, shared space. It was a potential crime scene, and I had to be the detective. Alina was incredibly organized, almost obsessively so. She kept all her important documents in a locked filing cabinet in her home office nook. I knew where she kept the key, in a small decorative box on her bookshelf. My hands trembled as I unlocked it. Inside, everything was neatly labeled: car title, old tax returns, work contracts. But in the very back, tucked behind a folder of old college transcripts, was a thin manila folder with no label. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside were bank statements. Statements for a private savings account at a different bank, one we didn't use. The account was in the name of Alina Vance. I scanned the pages, my data analyst brain kicking into high gear, processing the information with a cold, terrifying clarity. There were the monthly transfers from our joint account, clear as day, but there were also other deposits, large, sporadic ones from sources I didn't recognize, and there were very few withdrawals. The balance was staggering. It was well into the 6 figures. She had been doing this for far longer than just 6 months. The joint account transfers were just a recent, more aggressive escalation. She had built a secret life, a secret fortune, while I was sitting in the next room, managing our budget and planning for a future that apparently only I believed in. She had watched me, talked with me, slept next to me, all while knowing she was systematically dismantling everything we had built. The foreclosure notice wasn't a side effect of her plan. It felt like it was the goal. But why? Was she planning to leave me? Was she in some kind of trouble? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more painful than the last. I carefully put the folder back, locked the cabinet, and returned the key. I sat at my desk, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The image of our perfect life, our beautiful home, was now a cruel joke. I was living in a house of cards, and the person who had built it with me was the one holding the match. My grief was quickly being replaced by something else, something harder and colder: resolve. I didn't know the full extent of her plan, but I knew one thing for sure. I was not going to be a victim in her story. She had underestimated me. She saw me as the quiet, predictable wife who handled the spreadsheets. She was about to find out what a data analyst can do when presented with a pattern of deceit. The discovery of the secret bank account changed everything. The initial shock and hurt began to crystallize into a cold, methodical anger. I spent the next few days living a double life. To Alina, I was the worried, trusting wife, accepting her daily updates that she was still dealing with the bank's bureaucracy. To myself, I was an investigator, piecing together the fragments of her deception. Every evening when she came home, I had to compose my face into a mask of normalcy, asking about her day while my mind raced with calculations and questions. Every conversation was a minefield. Her lies were so effortless, so smooth. She'd sigh with frustration and talk about being on hold with the mortgage company for an hour, inventing entire conversations with fictional bank employees. It was a masterful performance, and if I hadn't seen the evidence with my own eyes, I would have believed every word. The ease with which she lied was, in some ways, more painful than the financial betrayal itself. It showed a depth of duplicity I never thought she possessed. My first call wasn't to a lawyer, but to Grace. I met her at a quiet coffee shop far from our neighborhood. As I laid out the story, the foreclosure notice, the canceled payment, the secret account under her maiden name, her expression shifted from sympathetic concern to the sharp, focused look of a professional. She didn't offer platitudes or easy comforts. Instead, she asked questions. Do you have copies of the statements? Have you checked your credit report recently? Is her name the only one on that secret account? She was already in forensic accountant mode, and her pragmatism was exactly what I needed. It grounded me, pulling me out of the emotional spiral and into a state of strategic thinking. You need to pull everything, she advised, her voice low and serious. Bank statements, credit card statements, tax returns, property deeds. Anything with both your names on it and anything with just yours. We need a complete financial picture before you make a single move. That night, after Alina was asleep, I began the grim task of downloading a decade's worth of our financial history. It was a deep dive into our shared life, but now I was looking at it with new eyes. I wasn't seeing vacations and home renovations. I was seeing a timeline of deception. I created a secure, password-protected folder on a new external hard drive, far away from our shared network. I organized everything by year, by account, by type. It was my own private data set, the story of my marriage told in debits and credits. As I sifted through the data, new patterns began to emerge. There were small, unexplained cash withdrawals from our joint account for years, never large enough to raise alarm, but consistent. There were credit cards in her name I didn't know existed, with balances that were being paid off from an unknown source. The secret Evance account wasn't a recent invention. It was an established part of her financial life. The large transfers from our joint account were just the final phase, a rapid acceleration of her plan. The biggest breakthrough came when I examined the other, non-joint account deposits into her secret fund. They were from a holding company I'd never heard of. A quick search online revealed it was a commercial real estate firm. This made no sense. Alina worked for a charity. Why would a real estate firm be paying her? I dug deeper, cross-referencing the dates of the deposits with her work calendar. The payments always coincided with her business trips she claimed were for donor meetings in other cities. My heart sank. The truth hit me with sickening certainty. She wasn't just hiding money. She was earning it from a source she had hidden from me. Was it a side job? A secret investment? The real estate connection felt significant, especially given that she was letting our own property fall into foreclosure. It was a cruel, baffling irony. I felt like I was chasing a ghost. I had the what, financial fraud on a massive scale, but I still didn't have the why. What was her endgame? Why destroy the life we had built together? Was there someone else involved? The thought was a fresh stab of pain. Financial infidelity was one thing, but if there was another person, that was a betrayal on a whole other level. I confided my suspicions, too. Grace, she listened patiently and then gave me my next task. You need a lawyer, Charlotte, not tomorrow now, and not just any lawyer, you need a shark, someone who specializes in high-asset divorce and financial fraud. She gave me a name, Ms. Anya Sharma. She's the best, Grace said. She'll know exactly what to do. That evening, as I lay in bed next to Alina, pretending to be asleep, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The fear and confusion were still there, but they were now overshadowed by a clear sense of purpose. Alina had built a complex web of lies, believing I would never have the ability or the courage to untangle it. She saw me as predictable, passive, easy to deceive. She had made a critical error. She had forgotten what I do for a living. I find the truth hidden in the data, and I was going to find every last secret she had buried. Her plan was about to collide with mine. My meeting with Anya Sharma took place in a sterile, intimidatingly modern office overlooking the city. Ms. Sharma was a woman who radiated competence. She was sharp, direct, and had an aura of calm, controlled power. She listened to my story without interruption, her eyes fixed on mine, occasionally jotting down a note on a legal pad. I handed her the external hard drive. Everything is on here, I said. All our joint accounts, my personal accounts, and the statements from her hidden account that I found. I've also cross-referenced the deposits with her work calendar. She took the drive and nodded, a flicker of approval in her eyes. You've done good work, Charlotte. Most people come in here with a story. You've come in with evidence. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. I wasn't just a victim, I was a prepared adversary. Ms. Sharma and her team, in collaboration with Grace, spent the next 2 weeks dissecting the data. They worked with a terrifying efficiency. They subpoenaed bank records for the Evance account, gaining access to the full, unadulterated transaction history. They ran background checks. They traced the payments from the real estate holding company. The picture that emerged was more shocking and sordid than I could have ever imagined. Alina hadn't just taken a side job. She was working with a commercial real estate developer, using her contacts from the charity world to identify undervalued properties owned by struggling nonprofits. She would then use her position of trust to facilitate sales to this developer at below-market rates, earning a hefty, undeclared finder's fee for each transaction. It was unethical, likely illegal, and a complete betrayal of the charitable mission she claimed to champion. She wasn't just deceiving me, she was exploiting vulnerable organizations. The developer, it turned out, was a man she had previously dated in college. The nature of their current relationship was unclear, but the professional and financial entanglement was damning. The foreclosure on our house was a calculated part of her exit strategy. As Ms. Sharma explained, by defaulting on the mortgage, Alina was intentionally destroying our shared credit and creating a financial crisis. Her plan was likely to let the house go, paint me as financially irresponsible or incompetent, and then use her hidden cash reserves to start a new life, unencumbered by a mortgage or a wife. She would walk away with a fortune, leaving me in the ruins of our shared debt and with a foreclosure on my record, making it nearly impossible for me to secure housing on my own. It was a scorched earth policy designed to leave me with nothing. The cold-blooded cruelty of it took my breath away. She's not just leaving you, Ms. Sharma stated, her voice devoid of emotion. She's trying to erase you. Armed with this knowledge, we built our case. The blueprint for my revenge wasn't going to be emotional or dramatic. It was going to be precise, legal, and financially devastating. Step 1 was to address the immediate threat, the foreclosure. Ms. Sharma's team contacted the mortgage lender. We provided them with a summary of the situation, a case of financial fraud by one party in the marriage, and made arrangements to pay the full outstanding amount, including all fees and penalties, from my personal savings. It was a painful check to write, depleting a significant portion of the money I had carefully saved, but it was a necessary move. It stopped the foreclosure process in its tracks and secured my ownership of the house. The house was now safe, under my control. Step 2 was asset protection. We immediately filed a legal motion to freeze all our joint assets and, more importantly, the Vance account. Ms. Sharma argued successfully that the funds in that account were marital assets, fraudulently obtained and diverted. The court agreed. With a single legal filing, Aliner's escape fund was frozen solid. She wouldn't be able to touch a single penny. Step 3 was preparing for the confrontation. Ms. Sharma was adamant that I should not confront Aliner alone or unprepared. "The moment you reveal what you know, the game changes," she warned. "We need to control the narrative. We will serve her with divorce papers at a time and place of our choosing. The papers will include a full accounting of her fraudulent activities." We prepared the divorce petition. It wasn't just a simple filing, it was a masterpiece of legal documentation. It laid out in meticulous detail every secret transfer, every hidden deposit, and every lie. It included copies of her bank statements, evidence of her undeclared income from the real estate deals, and a formal request for a forensic audit of the charity she worked for. We weren't just ending a marriage, we were exposing an entire enterprise of deceit. The final piece of the plan was personal. I went to the bank and restructured our finances. I opened new accounts in my name only. I changed all my passwords. I systematically cut every financial tie that bound me to her. Each action was a small act of liberation, a reclaiming of my independence. Aliner was still coming home every evening, lying about her calls with the bank, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break. She thought she was in control. She had no idea that I, the quiet data analyst, had already analyzed the variables, calculated the outcome, and was now simply waiting for the right moment to execute the final command. The day we chose was a Thursday. I selected it for its sheer ordinariness. There was no anniversary, no special occasion. It was just another day, which felt fitting for the dismantling of a life built on an ordinary, everyday lie. Aliner had a major fundraising gala that evening, the culmination of months of her work. It was her night to shine, to be the charismatic, caring face of her charity. It was the perfect stage for her world to crumble. I spent the day in a state of surreal calm. I went to work, participated in meetings, and wrote code, all on autopilot. Inside, my nerves were stretched taut, but on the surface, I was a placid lake. Grace texted me in the morning, "Thinking of you, you've got this." It was the anchor I needed. Ms. Sharma had choreographed everything. A process server was scheduled to arrive at Aliner's office at 4:00 p.m., just as she would be making her final preparations for the gala. He would serve her with the divorce petition and a temporary restraining order that prevented her from liquidating any assets or contacting me directly. At home, I prepared. I packed a small bag for Aliner with a few changes of clothes and her essential toiletries. I placed it neatly by the front door. Then, I systematically went through the house and removed every trace of her that wasn't purely functional. I took down our photos, boxed up her clothes, and cleared her things from the bathroom. The house felt strangely empty, but also clean, like a space that could finally breathe. It was no longer our house, it was mine. I had saved it. I had paid for it, I would live in it. At 4:05 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Ms. Sharma. "She has been served." I took a deep breath. The first move had been made. Now I waited. I expected a flood of angry calls, furious texts, but there was only silence. It was more unnerving than an outburst. It meant she was thinking, plotting her next move. But there were no moves left for her to make. We had anticipated everything. She came home around 6:00 p.m. She must have left her office immediately. I heard her car pull into the driveway, the engine cutting out with a final, ominous silence. I was sitting in the living room, the divorce petition, my copy on the coffee table in front of me. When she walked in, she looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Her gala dress was still in its carrier bag, slung over her arm. Her face was pale, her usual confident smile gone, replaced by a tight, brittle line. She saw the bag I had packed for her by the door. She saw the empty spaces on the walls where our pictures used to be. Her eyes finally landed on me. "Charlotte," she began, her voice strained. I held up a hand. "Don't," I said. My voice was even, devoid of the emotion that was churning inside me. "There is nothing left to say. You've been served. Your lawyer can speak to my lawyer." "How could you do this?" she asked, a tremor of fury in her voice. Ambushing me at work, trying to ruin my career. The audacity of her playing the victim was breathtaking. A cold laugh escaped my lips. "Ruin your career? Eleanor, you did that yourself. You used a charity as your personal hunting ground for real estate deals. You stole from our joint account to fund a secret life. You deliberately tried to let our home go into foreclosure to leave me with nothing. You don't get to be angry at me for turning on the lights in a room you chose to fill with filth." Her face went slack with shock. She had no idea how much I knew. She clearly thought I'd only discovered the mortgage issue. "The Vance account is frozen, Eleanor," I continued, my voice like ice. "So is every other asset we shared. The court has a copy of every statement, every transfer. They know about the real estate company. They know about your undeclared income. It's over." She sank onto the arm of the sofa, the fight draining out of her. She finally looked defeated. There were no more lies she could tell, no more performances she could give. She was just a woman whose meticulous plan had been dismantled by an even more meticulous one. "Why?" I asked, the one question I still needed an answer to. "After all our years together, why do this?" She stared at the floor for a long time before she spoke. "I was tired," she whispered. "Tired of this life, of being a team. I wanted something that was just mine. I met him again, the developer, and he showed me a different kind of life. A bigger one. I was going to leave. I didn't know how to tell you." It was a pathetic, selfish confession. She didn't want to be a partner anymore, so she decided to become a thief. "So you decided to destroy me instead of just leaving?" I asked. She had no answer. There wasn't one. I stood up. "Your bag is by the door. You need to leave. The restraining order is quite clear." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading for a flicker of the old affection, the old partnership. But there was nothing there for her. I was looking at a stranger. She picked up her bag and the dress for the gala she would never attend and walked out the door without another word. I locked it behind her, the click of the deadbolt sounding like the final word in a long, painful chapter. The storm had passed, and I was still standing. The weeks and months that followed were a blur of legal proceedings. Eleanor, stripped of her secret funds, had to hire a less-than-stellar lawyer, and her defense was weak. Faced with indisputable evidence of financial fraud, asset diversion, and undeclared income, she had no leverage. Ms. Sharma was relentless. We didn't just want a fair settlement, we wanted justice. The news of Eleanor's activities eventually reached the board of her charity. An internal investigation was launched, which quickly turned into a public scandal. She was fired in disgrace, and the story made the local news. The real estate developer she had been working with immediately cut all ties, leaving her completely isolated. Her grand plan for a bigger, better life had evaporated, leaving her with nothing but legal bills and a ruined reputation. Grace followed the proceedings with a grim satisfaction. Financial predators count on their victims being too emotional or too intimidated to fight back. She told me over coffee one day. "You weren't. You were methodical. You beat her at her own game." In the divorce settlement, I received the house, free and clear, along with a significant portion of the assets from the now unfrozen Vance account, which the court deemed marital property she had attempted to hide. It was more than fair. It was a vindication. The money she had stolen to build her escape route was now being used to secure my future. The irony was not lost on me, but the victory felt hollow at first. I had my house, my financial security, but my life had been fundamentally altered. The trust I once had in my own judgment was shattered. How could I have lived with someone for 12 years and not seen who she truly was? It was a question that haunted me in the quiet evenings in the now empty house. Slowly, I began to heal. The process wasn't linear. There were days filled with anger and grief, but there were also days of profound peace. I started reclaiming the house as my own. I painted the walls a new color, bought new furniture, and planted a garden in the backyard filled with vegetables instead of her ornamental roses. Each change was a small declaration of my independence. My work became my sanctuary. The logic and order of data analysis was a comfort. I poured my energy into a complex project and ended up getting a promotion. The new role came with more responsibility and a higher salary, a tangible result of my own merit and hard work. It was a reminder that my value was never tied to my marriage or to a leaner. It was mine alone. One of the most difficult but necessary steps was rebuilding my ability to trust. I leaned heavily on Grace, whose unwavering friendship was a lifeline. I started going to therapy, learning to process the trauma of the betrayal and to rebuild my sense of self. It was a slow, arduous process of learning to trust my own instincts again, to believe that not everyone was hiding a devastating secret. About a year after the divorce was finalized, I was sitting on my back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The house was quiet, filled only with the sounds of my own life. It was no longer a crime scene or a monument to a failed marriage. It was simply M. Why home? I had faced the worst betrayal imaginable from the person I loved most, and I had not only survived, but I had emerged stronger, more self-reliant, and more aware of my own capabilities. Eliner's plan was to leave me in ruins, but she had failed. A foundation built on lies was bound to crumble. But I had learned that I was perfectly capable of clearing the rubble and building something new, something better, on my own terms. And this time, I knew with absolute certainty that the foundation was solid. It was built by me for me.